Can the Honor Magic5 Lite, a 2023 mid-range smartphone, compete with a flagship 2019 Samsung Galaxy S10 Plus? Why is this of relevance? Well, I was using this as my primary device not too long ago, and it can be found in the UK and at the time of filming for roughly £300, while the Honor phone has just released and can also be found for roughly £330, making it quite a relevant comparison, at least in my opinion. Now in this video, you're going to be comparing them in all sorts of different benchmarks and seeing if the Honor Magic5 Lite is actually worth your money. So jumping straight in, let's talk about camera performance, and here you have got a triple camera setup at the rear of the Honor Magic5 Lite. You've got a 64 megapixel main, 5 megapixel ultra wide and 2 megapixel macro, while at the front you've got a 16 megapixel selfie camera. Now on the Samsung device you have got a triple camera array as well at the rear, whereby you've got a 12 megapixel wide, 12 megapixel telephoto and 16 megapixel ultra wide, while at the front you've got a 10 plus 8 megapixel dual camera array. So with the specs out of the way, let's jump into the image quality comparison of both of these smartphones. And here you can see a photo of the MG5 EV. This is a fully electric estate, and I've actually got it in for review for Totally EV. And yes, in case you're interested in car reviews, make sure you subscribe. Link will be down in the description below. Nonetheless, going back to the photo quality of both of these smartphones, you can see that the Magic5 Lite, at least on the top left-hand side of your screen, in comparison to the top right-hand side of your screen to the S10 Plus, looks a little bit better, whereby the contrast seems to be coming out and it doesn't seem as washed out as what the Samsung has been able to achieve. However, if we look at the ultra-wide picture of both of these phones, here the Honor Magic5 Lite gets absolutely crushed by the S10 Plus. And of course here it's because the S10 Plus's camera array, specifically when it comes to its ultra-wide lens, is far more superior. And thus, if you're going to be taking ultra-wide shots, I think you probably want to side away from using it on the Magic5 Lite. Now in this image, while I was cycling around in Richmond Park, you'll be able to see over here that the colours that again the Magic5 Lite is able to attain due to the slightly deeper contrast ratio seems to portray the image just a little bit better, while the S10 Plus looks again a little bit more washed out, all while saying that it does seem to attain a little bit extra detail. Now on a more close-up shot, and note this was not using the macro lens, you can see here that both of them actually do look pretty good, although I'd probably side more towards the S10 Plus, giving me a bit more of that lifelike reproduction rather than having a bit too much of an increased or somewhat artificial contrast ratio, which was attained via the Magic5 Lite. Scrolling through to more lower light images per se, whereby there was still plenty of light that was being drawn in, but it was a lot harder for these phones to actually keep up in terms of the ISO levels and in comparison to my DSLR, you can see here that the Magic5 Lite does a decent job when it comes to taking a picture of the steering wheel in comparison to the S10 Plus, while in more lower light conditions, the Magic5 Lite really starts to show some of the weaknesses, whereby you can see a lot more noise being generated, whereby again over here the S10 Plus seems to do a little bit of a better job in terms of giving an extra bit of detail and therefore being better in lower light conditions, let alone of course if we were to use flash. Now moving on, we get on to zoom capabilities, and over here you can see that yet again the Magic5 Lite seems to have a little bit of that better contrast in comparison to the S10 Plus, all while also suffering while going at even deeper zoom levels. So for example level 8, you can see here that the detail of the headlight is there, although due to that contrast ratio you can see that the details within the headlight unit itself have been lost, while they're actually still present on the S10 Plus, which again still looks a little bit washed out in comparison, but still does suffice when comparing it to some other smartphones. So what about when it comes to taking selfies? Well, here if I wanted to attain more detail, I'd go for the Magic5 Lite, whereby you'd be able to distinguish that there's a little bit more of extra detail toward my eyebrows and eyelashes in comparison to the image shot at the top right hand side of your screen, which is of the S10 Plus. But then equally, if I wanted to take portrait shots and therefore benefit from better post-processing, then the S10 Plus seemed to do a little bit better job in terms of the bokeh effect. It didn't seem to be as artificially reproduced in comparison to the Magic5 Lite. So to summarize my experiences while using both of these phones, I felt that in decent lighting conditions, the Magic5 Lite actually did a pretty good job, and its selfie camera was good as well. However, when it comes to dealing with lower light conditions or any sort of processing that needs to be done, such as let's say the bokeh effect, and equally using its ultra-wide lens, here the S10 Plus was my preferred phone of choice. But what about when it comes to using the Honor Magic5 Lite and comparing it to a more modern flagship smartphone? Well, here I've got the Honor Magic 4 Pro, which I know isn't of much relevance to the Magic 5 Lite, but see it as its older, more expensive sibling. And here I just thought, why the hell not to compare these two phones, because, well, I had them at hand. Now here, the Magic 4 Pro has got a triple camera array at the rear, it's got a 50 megapixel wide, 50 megapixel ultra wide, and a 64 megapixel periscope telephoto lens capable of a ridiculous 100 times digital zoom. It also has a 3D depth sensor. At the front, it also has another depth sensor, and this is also capable of biometric security, which is pretty cool. And you've also got a 12 megapixel selfie camera. Now, given the camera setup, it should come as no surprise to learn that the Magic 4 Pro completely trounces the Magic 5 Lite in every single department. Indeed, here, the color tones were a lot more accurate. The ultra-wide lens seemed to do a lot better job. Here, the closer-up shot, again, seemed to do better in terms of dealing with the contrast, and equally when it came to dealing with detail around the trees. As for the lower light shots, there were a lot more detail found towards the steering wheel and less noise found towards the rear of the center console. As for the zoom levels, the level 2 was far superior in terms of attaining a better quality shot, while there was a lot more clarity while zooming in all the way into 8 times in comparison to the 5 Lite. As for the selfie cameras, they're actually a lot more comparable, although still here I felt that the overall software optimization and also the clarity on my face was better on the Magic 4 Pro in comparison to the 5 Lite. Now indeed, the Magic 4 Pro completely trounces the Magic 5 Lite, so let's just take it out of the equation, at least for the time being, and bring back the S10 Plus. Now here I'm not going to be looking at still photography anymore, but looking at video capabilities. Now I will say that I was actually pretty disappointed by the Magic 5 Lite. See here it bolsters a variety of different features when it comes to video capability, such as let's say the multi-video functions, which are pretty cool actually, but given the fact that the lenses both at the front and the back are limited to 1080p 30fps, and yes that means no 4K recording or any slow-mo capabilities, it is quite poor in comparison to even an older smartphone such as the S10 Plus, which is able to shoot at up to 4K 60fps. Now besides that, I went to do it in terms of a level playing field, and therefore recording at 1080p 30fps on both smartphones, I was still left pretty underwhelmed by the Magic 5 Lite. It suffered from a lot of noise, and specifically while running or moving around, it suffered from quite a bit of problems when it comes to the overall software optimization. Frankly here, the S10 Plus completely trounced it when it came to the overall video capabilities, and by the way, the S10 Plus isn't exactly the best smartphone in the world, even back in the days when it comes to its smartphone recording capabilities, but here, comparing these two phones, I would certainly say that the Samsung did a far better job in providing me a better recording experience. So moving on from camera quality, let's talk about raw performance. And here I put the phones across a multitude of different tests, so let's jump straight into it. So first off, testing single core and multi-core applications on Geekbench 5, you can see that the Magic 5 Lite is actually pretty comparable to the S10 Plus, which took me quite by surprise. However, things quickly changed when I went to the AI benchmark version 5.0.3. You can see here that there's a massive disparity between the two, 100 points to be more specific. Equally, the S10 Plus has almost 100 points in deficit in comparison to the modern flagship smartphones. Now as for the GFX bench, here the Magic 5 Lite didn't seem to do that well. Across the benchmarks that I ran, you can see here that the average FPS didn't seem to be that high, while here the S10 Plus seemed to do a little bit of a better job. Of course, yet again, the S10 Plus really couldn't compare with the Magic 4 Pro, but again, that shouldn't come to any sort of surprise. Now aside from the benchmarks, I will say subjectively that the Magic 5 Lite did do a decent job when it comes to running mobile games, such as for example Asphalt 9. I didn't feel any sort of problems while using the phone, and furthermore, given that it does sport a 120Hz AMOLED display, it gave me a good fluid experience. Suffice to say, if you are a hardcore mobile gamer, you might want to consider looking at increasing your budget and therefore getting a more expensive smartphone that can deal with those higher amounts of frames. but alternatively, if you see yourself as a casual gamer, or indeed if you're just using it for social media, or of course just taking photos on the go, then the Magic 5 Lite raw performance will certainly suffice. Speaking of which, when it comes to multitasking, you have got 6GB of physical RAM and then 5 additional gigabytes which is drawn from the storage. Of course, where you have got it available, it means that you have got the Honor RAM Turbo functionality. In practice, it means that I didn't encounter any sort of problems while switching between apps, or indeed launching a multitude of apps pretty rapidly. Of course, your mileage may vary depending on how you use your smartphone. So this perfectly brings me on to its user interface, and here it's running Magic UI 6.1, which is a pretty heavy skin on top of Android 12. It is certainly no competition with some of its competitors, including, let's say, the Samsung Galaxy S10 Plus, which runs on the One UI platform instead, which just feels a lot more cleaner. Furthermore, here you have got quite a bit of bloatware that comes pre-installed with the Magic 5 Lite, which is not appreciated in my books. Furthermore, you've got certain features such as, let's say, the yo-yo assistant, which is completely rendered useless. Now elsewhere, I would like to point out that there's only 128GB of storage, which should suffice for most people, but unfortunately there is no microSD expansion slot, which will come to a disappointment for certain consumers. Now, while I would change a few things when it comes to software, I would not want to touch its incredible 5100 mAh battery, not only in terms of the sheer capacity, but also in terms of my controlled benchmark. It netted 31 hours and 52 minutes, which is by far the best result I have seen, be it in or out of a flagship device. Indeed, it completely trounces any sort of mid-range smartphones, including my Samsung Galaxy S10 Plus. Now, I would like to point out that this was with the dynamic refresh rate option enabled in terms of the display options found in terms of the settings. Now, if I were to go and force 120Hz, which is the capabilities of the Magic 5 Lite, it drops to roughly 25 hours. So worthwhile considering if you do want to utilize the most out of the phone, in other words, the full refresh rate, you will have to note that it will take a knock-on effect in terms of the overall battery life that you'll be able to attain. Now, if you do run out of juice, you'll be pleased to know that you have got a 40-watt rated USB Type-C port, allowing you fast charging capabilities. Now, on the flip side, you do not have any sort of wireless charging capabilities, but personally, given that I don't even use wireless charging on my Samsung Galaxy S10 Plus, it's not something I'm overly bothered about. Now, I did just reference its screen, and indeed it runs up to 120Hz refresh rate at 1080x2400 on a 6.67-inch form factor. In comparison to my S10 Plus, it has a higher refresh rate, but indeed a lower resolution, but has the same fantastic curved AMOLED display, which is quite a rarity at this price point, and made me quite enjoy the user experience. But it is worth noting here that the manufacturer claims that you should get up to 800 nits in terms of peak brightness, but I didn't achieve anywhere near this, getting roughly 530 nits from my own tests. Now, past this impressive and vivid display, let's talk about its design. And here, the Honor Magic 5 Lite weighs in at just 175 grams, making it very easy to pocket. Better still, it only comes in at 7.9mm in thickness, which is really impressive for a phone that houses a whopping 5100 mAh battery. Now, as for the looks of it, it has a pretty wide diameter camera circle that can be found towards the rear, but I've got no inherent complaints with it. As for the colours, it's available in midnight black, titanium silver, and also the pretty picturesque emerald green, which also has got a matte coating to it, therefore meaning it doesn't show up fingerprints as much as some other alternatives out there on the market. Now, in terms of interacting with the smartphone, on the right hand side you have got a physical volume rocker and a power button. Then in terms of the lower segment of the screen, you have got a optical fingerprint sensor, which actually does work pretty well, but better still, this can be paired up with facial recognition technology, therefore making it very easy to unlock your smartphone, of course in a secure manner. Then you've also got a downward firing speaker, and unfortunately you do not have a stereo configuration like you'd find, for example, on the Samsung Galaxy S10 Plus, and equally there's an omission of a 3.5mm jack, which will be of disappointment to certain individuals like myself. Indeed, over here this is a recent trend, so I can't be overly critical from the manufacturer. Aside from this, you have got a dual nano SIM slot, and of course, as I did mention before, you do not have any micro SD expansion function slot. Now, aside from all of this, I would like to point out that it does have NFC built in, allowing you to do contactless payments, which is certainly appreciated. But on the flip side, it doesn't have any sort of ingress protection, therefore meaning it's got no water or dust resistance. So there we have it. Hopefully you enjoyed my detailed review of the Honor Magic5 Lite and also appreciated the comparison to the trusty Samsung Galaxy S10 Plus. If I had to pick between the two, I'd still side towards the Samsung, although I do appreciate the fluidity of the screen of the 5 Lite and also the stonkingly good battery life. As such, I can see myself recommending it for those people who want a new smartphone, and as a result it gets my value award. Now do let me know in the comment section below which one you would pick, and of course if you've liked this detailed independent review and comparison, do consider dropping a like, subscribing and hitting that bell notification, all of which would be greatly appreciated. As such, I've been Totally Dubbed and I'll hopefully see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves and goodbye.